Everybody loves being entertained. We love to let our hair down and laugh loudly when we are out on the town. There's nothing like stand-up comedy to lift your spirits and split your sides at the same time. We'll have a convo about comedy with Dan Feist on this week's episode of FYI. Welcome to For Your Info.
En inglés.
You got it. Hello, 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 and welcome to another exciting edition of FYI, For Your English. And I'm really psyched. Yeah, I'm going to use a word that we use in the States. I am psyched. Emocionado, mentalizado, I'm psyched because today we've got an amazing program for you. A wonderful guest, a great friend of mine. I want to welcome someone you may already know, and if you don't know him, you will after today's show. Please welcome Dan Feist.
Hey, how you doing, Alberto? Thanks for having me.
Hey, how's it going, man? Great to have you. We've been talking about this for quite some time.
That's right.
And finally, we made it happen by hook or by crook. You're here with me in the studio. You even got a beer in your hand, which I think is awesome. I think we're going to have a chat here about comedy.
Yep, we're just having a laid-back chat, and I'm going to be enjoying this beer.
Awesome. And I'm sure the listeners are going to enjoy our conversation about comedy. First, we want to find out a little bit about you, Dan. Now, I know, let's pretend I don't know anything about you. Hi, nice to meet you. Tell me a little bit about yourself, Dan Feist.
Well, originally from Minnesota, Wisconsin, in the United States. That's the upper Midwest. But I've been in Spain for 20 years, and I've had all kinds of cool opportunities. This is the latest cool opportunity, being on FYI.
Awesome. And this sounds familiar because you were on an episode recently telling us a little bit about why you love Spain.
That's right. I did send you that.
So that's great. This is really your second participation, but this one you're really here in the flesh, as we say. Right?
Absolutely. In the flesh.
In the flesh.
Doing it live.
So you live in Spain. You're from the United States. That's one thing we have in common. But another thing we have in common is we're both performers. We both love comedy. We, ever since we met, we've been saying, have you seen this one? Did you see this sketch? Do you know this? And I think that's one thing. Also, our love of beer as well has brought us together. I mean, a lot of good things.
And the English language.
And we're both English teachers, so we do have a lot in common. Even though you'd think our states have nothing in a boy from New York, you'd be like, what? But actually, we're more similar than I think we can imagine. But
that's scary.
It's scary. It is. But that's maybe even comical. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Excellent.
Now, how did you get into performing? How did you get into comedy? Because you've now performed in English and Spanish. You also are one of the forerunners, I would say, of comedy and improv here in Madrid. Right.
Well, thank you for saying that. Mm-hmm. I definitely have put in some time. Mm-hmm. It all started when my wife told me that we were pregnant, and I went, oh, that means all my dreams either have to come true now or I can never achieve them. So I started doing stand-up at first in Spanish, and it was just really soul-crushing experience, trying to get laughs when you don't know what you're doing in stand-up.
Well, it's hard to get laughs in your own language.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. But I made really good friends back in the day in those first open mics. And people who've really kept pushing me forward and really helping me out a lot. And so that was great. Shortly after, I started a comedy group with a couple other really great comedians.
Awesome people.
Called Freshly Comedy. And we were around for 9 years, doing live shows. And that's kind of maybe why I'm one of the forerunners of the comedy scene here.
Well, it's true. At first, I was like, wait, there's nothing else like this. Freshly Comedy, which was an initiative that Dan and some other awesome friends of ours put together, bilingual, all of you, with a love of comedy, and you brought people together. Hey, when is Freshly Comedy coming back? Will we ever see Freshly Comedy again?
I'm afraid we won't. I'm still performing quite a bit, both in stand-up and improv, with dark roast comedy, dark roast comedy for stand-up, and mad improv for improvisations. But the other members continue to be doing creative things and continue to be producing. Tony's making a podcast about movies. Sean is writing political cartoons for satire magazines all over Britain. And so I think we've moved past Freshly. It will live forever.
It really was a unique initiative for English speakers in Madrid, which there are many, not just the people from Madrid, but also people who were learning English in Madrid, not just native English speakers. I mean, so it brought together a very international crowd of people who were laughing, drinking beer, because if I recall, it was at the beer station. Is this an episode about beer or comedy?
Well, I don't know, man, but I think they go hand in hand. So.
Sure. You want to see a good stand-up show with an icy cold brew and some good company, right?
Absolutely.
Now, stand-up comedy, I think most people would think about it. I know they say monologos, but in English, a monologue sounds more like in a movie to me or from a play, right?
Well, that's a really interesting thing to say because when I started in stand-up in Spanish, it was in 2009. Mm-hmm. And monologo was the word that almost everybody used, monologuista.
It was a buzzword, yeah.
But at that time, the comedians were doing something that was more similar to a monologue than to stand-up comedy.
Ah, so it really was like a written. Gotcha.
Right. So when I think of a monologue, I think of a stage play,
like a soliloquy of
yes,
sorts.
Exactly. Right, exactly. There was always that one monologue in the Shakespeare play, or Cinco Horas con Mario.
Right. Mm-hmm.
In that play, it's one person having a monologue for 5 hours about one person.
Oh, man.
All right, and so. It was stand-up in the past was a lot more like that. The comedians here were more like actors who were doing some funny script. They were hiding behind their script.
Putting on voices, things like this.
That's right. Exactly. But not just putting on voices, following a very scripted style.
Gotcha.
And in stand-up, it has to be a lot more spontaneous.
Right.
And you have to be willing to forget all of your material and talk about what's happening right now in the room.
Right. You don't have to necessarily stick to the script, which is a great expression to look at.
Yep, absolutely. And so nowadays, in the last 15 years, of course, comedy has really evolved in Spain. And now we still have some of the older school monologue style.
Right.
And we have many other styles that are fresher, liver, quite a bit more diverse.
Right, off the cuff. I mean, because sure, you want to be scripted, you want to have an idea of what you want to say, but I always say when the script limits you, that's not a good thing.
Oh, absolutely. Later we'll talk about Bill Hicks. He was a legendary comedian who died way too young. He said that your script is only there for you when you don't have anything funnier to say.
Wow. See, I was going to say he's more than a comedian. I would say we're going to talk about Bill Hicks, but he was a visionary of sorts.
Oh,
as well.
Right, absolutely.
A political, before Bill Maher and all these political comments.
Yeah.
I mean,
he's still relevant today, even though he died in like 1993.
Another one, George Carlin, still relevant. The things he said are not only funny today, but they're brutally, honestly true.
Yeah.
It's incredible. So we're going to talk about that in the bonus part, guys. We're going to take a look at a bunch of different classics. We're going to recommend some of our favorite sketches, some of our favorite bits. But first, I wanted to take a look at the definition of stand-up comedy, according to Wikipedia, because you got to trust Wikipedia.
Wikipedia is an excellent tool if you know how to use it.
Exactly.
So let's see if we can use it right.
Let's see if you agree with their definition. Stand-up comedy consists of one-liners, stories, observations, or shtick that may incorporate props, music, magic tricks, or ventriloquism. I mean, this is a very broad definition, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
How would you define in your definition? What is stand-up comedy if you had to define it?
Stand-up comedy is the solution for people who don't want to live anymore but can't commit suicide.
So they get on stage, expose themselves.
That's right. One of my favorite comedians said, Jesus died on the cross for your sins. I die on stage every night for your mere entertainment value.
Just so you laugh at me and decide how good I may or may not be.
Right. No, but I mean, stand-up is really the total art form because you have to come up with the idea, you have to write the idea, edit the idea, then you have to produce a show, promote the show, direct the show, and star in the show.
Right.
And everything is on you. You don't get to count on anybody else for support.
A one-man band.
And very much so, right? And that was very typical in many European countries. They still call it a one-man show. Well, yeah, are you doing a one-man show? And the one-man show.
Yeah.
Because it's that. It is all that.
And so it's really somebody getting on stage, exposing themselves, telling stories, making people laugh, entertaining people. Because what are people going out to be in the end? Okay, they want to laugh, but above all that, it's entertainment. I want to forget about what's happening in the world, or quite the contrary. Some comedy makes you think about what's going on in the world and laugh it off.
And it can even help change your perspective or your opinion about something, is Bill Hicks. And I'm just repeating him because I don't want to keep spoiling other comedians for the second half of the show. But Bill Hicks said, the U.S. went to war in Iraq, and they said war, but can anyone tell me what the Iraqis' uniform looked like?
Right.
And so it kind of it made a very clear point that we weren't really fighting an army when we were there, right? And even that line from 1991 or 1992 could be applied to certain current events that we're seeing nowadays.
Absolutely. That's the thing about good comedy, just like good writing of novels.
Timeless.
It's timeless.
I aspire to be that. So obviously not everything I can write can be timeless, but I aspire to have some of those real key bits,
right?
As you said before, bits, be those jokes that really last forever.
Well, this is really interesting stuff. Now, I wanted to find out a little bit about where and when comedy started. And the first thing first thing that popped into my mind, obviously, was vaudeville, which was kind of music and shows and people dancing, these kind of reviews.
Right.
And then it developed into a more like strictly comedy-based thing.
Well, I would say that there were kind of two main veins that were feeding into the creation of stand-up. And one of them definitely was this idea of cabaret, vaudeville, variety show kind of a thing, where the host or one of the guests would be particularly funny, only speaking.
Right.
The other vein that fed stand-up comedy was public speaking.
Oh.
They consider that Mark Twain probably had the first stand-up comedy tour. As towards the end of his life, he had made some bad investments and was broke. So he started a speaking tour.
Oh, wow.
And his speaking tour was quite comical, of course. The American Comedy Award is named the Mark Twain Award. He is the creator of the American novel and the creator of American satire in a certain sense. So.
Oh, interesting. And yeah, well, it makes sense now that you say it.
But later, stand-up wasn't used until, I don't know, did you?
Well, I looked up some information. Again, Wikipedia, gotta trust them. Gotta trust them with your life.
Well, let's see what you have.
The first and I quote, the first documented use of stand-up as a term was in The Stage in 1911, describing a Miss Nellie Perrier delivering stand-up comic ditties in a chic and charming manner.
I would say that that's true. I've heard that name before, and I've heard that's coming through. But a ditty to me sounds like a song.
Yeah, that's
more than
thing.
Just a spoken rhythm thing.
That's the thing. Well, it says a performance of comedy songs, yes, rather than stand-up comedy in true terms. However, in the Yorkshire Evening Post, this is November 10th, 1917, the Stage Gossip column described the career of a guy named Finlay Dunn.
Okay.
And the article states that Dunn played as what he calls a stand-up comedian. So this was the first time they said, here's a profession. Here's, somebody does this as a job. The other one was mentioning the act. She was due, and this one says a stand-up. So let's say in the early 1900s.
Absolutely, yeah. And then for what we would consider modern stand-up, most people think that the late 50s, early 60s is when it started to get established. Lenny Bruce is widely considered the original stand-up. He's a Jewish guy from New York who is very critical of pretty much anything. He was anti-establishment. He talked a lot about politics or religion, sex, vulgarity.
Sure.
So if you think back to the pure 1950s in American culture, and then here's this man coming to our town. He was kind of like a Jim Morrison.
Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm.
A couple of decades before Jim Morrison was Jim Morrison.
Right.
And so he was great. He one of his most famous lines was against censorship was if you can't say fuck, you can't say fuck the government. And so it's not the most hilarious joke, but it's very poignant. It makes a very good point. And there's a twist at the end, and we'll talk about the twist in a little bit.
Interesting. Yeah, because there's this line where if you want to find out what's happening in a particular society or culture, just look at their art. And I include comedy in that. I include stand-up comedy. You want to know what was happening in the 60s? Watch the stand-up comics. Look at the art. Look at the movies. Look, that's going to tell the story more than the history books, IMO.
Sure, no, no, absolutely, I agree. The same would go for music. So if you find some songs from Bob Marley, if you listen to it, you can figure out what's happening in Jamaica in 1973 or 1976 in the political scene. Mm-hmm. And so, absolutely, you got to listen to the art. And stand-up is that thing, you know. Not every comedian is a critic.
No, there's all, and that's great. That's we're going to get into that now. The different styles. We already said some people do shtick. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the different styles that are out there? There's the obviously observational, right? Like my brother-in-law, the other day.
Sure. Well, the observational one, Seinfeld was really famous for this.
Absolutely.
And not. I mean, he was so famous for it that they parlayed it into a series that lasted 13 years and was super popular. Right?
And it's all about the nuances in the language.
and the observational, and the observational comedy comes up with this idea. It generally starts with, have you ever noticed that...
What's the deal with these people?
That's his line. What is the deal with? And so he questions things, and he does a lot of like really banal or mundane observation things, and then he makes them quite entertaining. And so there's that observational side.
Observational. Then
I love one line.
A lot of the voice guys too, who do a lot of different voices, and tell stories.
Sure. I mean, the storytelling comedian is perhaps the most common kind of comedian nowadays. Because before I get to storytelling, I'd like to talk about the one-liner.
The
one-line comedian.
Oh, yeah.
And so these are jokes that generally are less than 20 words in their full scope, right? One of my favorite one-liners is actually from a Spanish comedian named Luis Alvaro, and he said that ¿sabías que la mayoría de las personas que entran o utilizan un baño de minusválidos lo hacen por accidente? And so it's biting.
It took me a second there.
Yeah, right. But that's a one-liner. It's a very short joke, and it contains like all the parts of it. Yeah, so there's a little hand grenade, right? And so like this is a standard joke, a traditional joke, what the Spanish people call the chiste popular, has some aspects of the one-liner. Because you try and keep it short, you give as much detail in as few words as possible, and then you get to the payoff, the punchline. But and then one-liner comedians can't really tell stories. But on the other side of the spectrum, you have the storyteller,
right, where it's a very involved. Every character is like real,
right? And not only that, but my jokes don't. If I'm telling a story, my jokes don't have to be complete jokes. And we're going to talk about the structure of a joke and the setup and the punchline. But if I'm telling a story, I can use other kinds of tools to be funny.
Okay, interesting. I was just thinking of a one-liner that I loved. I think Henny Youngman was his name. He was like the king of one from Goodfellas. Dr. Jones, wonderful doctor, gave a guy 6 months to live, couldn't pay his bill, gave him another 6 months. You know what I mean? It's like you said, he's like, he introduces the guy, this is the doctor, here's the, and boom.
And so I'm gonna, and we'll talk about that in the second part. So bring that line up again later, if you will.
I'm a big fan of one-liners because let's be honest, my attention span, that's my problem there. That's why one-liners are great for me. Puns. I love puns, obviously, as a language lover.
Yeah, no, and one-liners can include some kinds of puns, and a pun is a play on words, where you make fun of a double meaning, because you're about homophones, aren't you?
Yeah, I love
homophones in English all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
And so you can get a lot of homophones to give you a double meaning or a double understanding of a situation. So Very good. Very good.
Awesome. So we got puns, slapstick, but that's not really with comedy. That's a kind of more of comedy for sketches and stuff.
Well, slapstick depends a little bit less on the verbal and a little bit more on the physical or on the acting.
Like speaking of Seinfeld, Michael Kramer.
Cosmo.
Cosmo Kramer. I'm mixing the actor's name with the character.
Michael Richards, right? Cosmo. So he or if you look at old movies with the cops, these black and white movies with the tubby cops who are falling all over the place, and whatever.
The Three Stooges.
Yep, there you go. And so slapstick is a little bit more physical than verbal, but there's definitely room inside stand-up as an art
to mix them,
or even to rely quite a bit on slapstick.
So any art, what I'm getting from you here is like any art. It's not. I don't just do slapstick. I don't just do observational humor. It's not just tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah, well,
I wanted to stop in that. What is tongue-in-cheek?
Well, tongue-in-cheek. At first, it doesn't seem to make sense, but if you think about each word individually, it is when you push your tongue on the inside of your cheek, kind of going, it's a joke. and tongue-in-cheek tends to be a joke that's a little more subtle.
Right.
That isn't as obvious. And so the person kind of gives you that facial expression.
Like, yeah.
So that you understand that he's joking and that was a joke,
exactly.
right? And tongue-in-cheek is good. It just, it means insincere in a sense.
Sure. Sophomoric, it's my favorite kind of humor.
Which is...
Poo-poo and pee-pee jokes.
Right? No, and...
farts.
Yeah. Is my son came home a lot when he was younger with caca, culo, pedo, pis. And he would just laugh at that.
That's timeless, dude. Sophomoric humor is timeless in some way. All right, so here's what I want to talk about, because most of us have been in the audience. We've been to shows, stand-up comedy shows, any kind of shows to be entertained. And I know myself, it can be very nerve-wracking dealing with stage fright, and especially you're trying new material that you haven't tried. What is tell us a little bit about the process of how you create a bit or a joke, and I don't know, some of the do's and don'ts, because I'm sure many people don't understand what goes into coming up with your next, let's say you're planning your next bit. What would you do now?
Well, try not to force myself.
Okay.
This is like if you're trying to write a novel and you sit down and you say, I'm going to write a novel, and you sit down at the computer and where do you start, right?
Now what?
So it's good to draw on experiences or ideas or reactions that you've had in your real life and go, oh, you know what? I think I could really expand on that idea. So I'm trying to think of something that I did recently that isn't too offensive for the podcast.
We're not going to get canceled or anything, right?
No, I can't get canceled. I don't have anything to begin with. How am I going to get canceled? We can maybe talk about that too.
Right.
So you draw on something where you were funny in your real life or had a funny idea in your real life, and then you sit down. And from there, what I would do is try and talk it through with some friends.
Okay.
But as a conversation.
Yeah. See if your friends think it's a funny story.
Drop it in conversation.
Right. Gotcha.
And then feed off of their reactions.
You're testing them a little bit. Okay.
Right. And but the other thing is that comedians really work well when they're bouncing things off of people.
Absolutely. Sure.
All right. And
that's the whole thing. Stand-up comedy doesn't work without the audience.
Exactly. And there's so many important factors in involving the audience in your stand-up so that your stand-up can be good. So I bounce it off of my friends with some conversation, and then I go home and I try to structure it. And there are different typical joke structures that comedians use. A real typical one is the afterthought.
Okay.
Which is like, we're having the kids for dinner. We're gonna make them on the barbecue, right? We're not inviting them. We're going to eat them. Okay. The
Which
afterthought.
Means both. Sure.
And so this afterthought is like that funny thing that you say after somebody else finishes a sentence. It's very typical in your work conversations or in your friend conversations.
It's almost like a comeback of sorts.
Yep, exactly.
Like I got something funny to say there.
And so you'll
witty.
See, something witty, of course. You'll see a lot of comedians use the afterthoughts considerably, quite a bit, and also the rule of three.
Okay.
So I give you 3 examples. Then the first 2 examples start to set a line. They start to set an expectation, a way of thinking, and your brain thinks that it has reached that final conclusion. But then my third option is a surprise, and that's where the fun is. All right.
Right. And you're like, I've been eating really healthy lately. I had for breakfast, I had some oatmeal, then I had some kiwi, and a 6-pack of donuts.
Yep, exactly.
And everyone's like, wait, whoa, what happened there?
That's right. That was the big turn. That's where the surprise is.
So you want to catch them off guard, too. Comedy's a little bit about catching people off guard.
It's all about surprise.
Surprise, the element of surprise. I love it. Yeah, we're trying to sum up something. Think about this. We're trying to sum up something that's hard to sum up because comedy is so many different things. It's sense of humor is something, cultural sometimes. I wanted to talk about that, not right yet. We only have a few minutes left, but continue with the creating the joke and the do's and the don'ts.
And then the do's are talk about what you know about. Don't talk about what you don't know about. Okay. It will be obvious to everyone that you don't know what you're talking about, so do that. Another thing is to, you mentioned stage fright, nerve-wracking. Mm-hmm. Well, for me, it was really big. At first, I saw the audience as an enemy or an opponent that I had to win.
Gotcha.
That I had to beat them somehow. I had to win over them. Yeah, right? And then I realized that that's not true at all. People who go to a comedy show made plans, bought the tickets ahead of time.
Usually spend some good money to get there, parking.
They're going to have dinner. They're going to park. Maybe they have kids, so they have a babysitter. Mm-hmm. So they have a lot invested in the fact that the show is going to go well, and they're going to have a great time, and they want to have a good time. Mm-hmm. So I had to convince myself that I don't have to win them. They're on my team. Yeah. This is my living room. They came here to have a good time.
Right.
I know how to make them have a good time. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, we can do this.
Right. You have that contract, that unsigned contract.
Yep.
Sure.
Yep. So
excellent. Interesting. And have you ever had to deal with hecklers?
I love it.
Okay, so hecklers are these people who feel like they came there to be the comedian, but they're not on the poster.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's the person in the audience who yells out comments at inappropriate and inconvenient times.
Right.
But
that's not true all the time. You're like, this is comedy. We're generalizing.
Yep, exactly.
And I guess what you would do is, knowing you incorporate them into the show.
You're right. I mean, there are different ways to go about it, but the first thing you remind them that they're in the audience and you're on stage.
Right.
But you do it gently. You're like, hey, excuse me. I don't know if you noticed that you're in the dark in a chair and I'm on a raised platform with lights and a microphone so everybody can hear me. Do you remember? So that's how this works, is you be quiet over there and I talk up here.
I don't want to talk about hierarchy, but if there is one here.
Right. And if they keep going, then you can turn it up. You can get a little bit mean with them. You can get a little bit more aggressive. Mm-hmm. But the best thing is not to get aggressive yet. To just say, talk. Because whatever they say, they're going to say something so stupid, you're going to get a great laugh.
Exactly. I've seen some of the best, bits come from a heckler.
That spontaneous reaction.
And it goes back to what you said about, okay, you should have an idea, a script, an order, your stuff worked out.
Right, but your script is only there for when you don't have something funnier to say right now.
As our buddy Bill Hicks said, well, guys, we've reached the end of the first part. We're going to come back in the bonus part. We're going to talk about the cultural differences in humor. We'll talk a little bit about cancel culture.
Okay.
We'll talk about Bill Hicks and some of our favorite comedians that we'll recommend, some vocabulary, some idioms, and so much more. If you guys are interested in finding out more about the bonus part and getting vocabulary, PDFs with vocabulary and tons of expressions, everything that we looked at today, and weekly and monthly classes with me, you can find out more on patreon.com/Alberto Alonso. And a quick shout out to all my patrons, especially my super duper students, Javier, Roberto, David, Jose Maria, Mila, Alex, Patricio, Edgar, and don't forget about my interstellar students, Isabel, Paco, Diego, Carmen, and Diana. Thank you so much, guys. And to all of you who are going to join us in the bonus part of today's FYI.